Welcome to Russian History Retold, Episode 348, Veliky Novgorod. Last time, we covered the long-standing Rurikid dynasty that lasted for over 700 years. Today, we will talk about the history of one of the oldest cities in Russia, Novgorod. Over the past almost 15 years of this podcast, the one city in Russia I did not give enough love to was Veliky Novgorod. First off, I need to translate the word Veliky and Novgorod. Veliky means grand, great, or big, which is a perfect description of Novgorod, especially in the 9th through the 13th century. The word Novgorod means new town. Now let's also situate the city geographically. It lies in the northeast corner of Russia, about 600 kilometers away from Moscow and 1,500 kilometers north of Kyiv. So, when was Novgorod founded? That's kind of a tough question to answer precisely, as there are many theories, and many of those do not fit with the archaeological evidence. The first mention of Novgorod appears in the Sofia First Chronicle, which makes a mention of it in 859, while the Novgorod First Chronicle first mentions it in 862, when it was a major Baltic to Byzantium station on the trade route from the Scandinavian nations to the Eastern Roman Empire. Known as the route from the Varangians to the Greeks, it began in Scandinavian trading centers, crossing the Baltic Sea, entering the Gulf of Finland, and then following the Neva River into Lake Ladoga. From there, it followed the Volkhov River upstream past the towns of Staraya Ladoga and Novgorod, which became a major trading center. The route crossed Lake Ilmen and continued up the Lovat River and the Kunya River. From there, it went down the Dneva River towards the Dnieper. It then went into the Black Sea and eventually to Constantinople. Archaeological evidence does not go back further than 930, but the Charter of Novgorod recognizes 859 as the year when the city was first mentioned in the chronicles. Whichever date is used, Novgorod quickly became a major trading place and made it an ideal spot for the Varangians to take control of. While the primary chronicles claim that the people of Novgorod asked Rurik and his men to take control because of the lawlessness of the area, it is likely the real reason was the economic benefits the area had for the Varangians. The Scandinavian name for the city, according to the Norse sagas, is Holmgard, but there is a debate whether it's the name of the city or that of an outpost or fort. It could also be the name for what the Russians called Rurikovo Gorodish. This settlement was founded by local Slavic people in the 700s. It is also a site which includes the original residence of the princes of Novgorod. The first mention of the city outside of the Russian and Scandinavian chronicles occurs in the 10th century policy manual De Administrando Imperio by Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII between 948 and 952. While Novgorod was initially the most important city in the land of the Rus, it would be overtaken by Kyiv in 882 by Rurik's successor, Oleg of Novgorod, who conquered Kyiv and founded the state of Kievan Rus. While this made Novgorod the second city, it was still particularly important culturally and economically, so much so that a tradition began where the firstborn of the Prince of Kyiv would become the Grand Prince of Novgorod. If there was no son to send, Novgorod would be governed by possadniks such as the legendary Gostmysil, Dobrina, Konstantin, and Ostromir. One of the differences between Novgorod and many of the other cities of ancient Russia, like Pskov, Kyiv, Vladimir, was their difference in how the princely succession occurred. In most of the city-states, succession went from brother to brother. Not so with Novgorod, as I mentioned earlier. While it was the right of the son of the Grand Prince of Kiev to name the head of their northern neighbor, there were a number of times when people just refused to accept the prince, with one example being in 1136, when they removed Vyacheslav Mstislavich Monomakh from their city. This would mark the beginning of the Novgorod Republic. Some historians link the change in Novgorod to that of the Podesta in Italian city-states, which made them refer to Novgorod as a quote-unquote commercial republic. In 1156, Novgorod regained religious independence by asserting the right to choose their own archbishop. One of the reasons for Novgorod going to these lengths to establish their autonomy was the collapse of the Kievan state. They also had to deal with threats from foreign invasions from the west. One of the most famous was the one known as the Massacre on the Ice. It was fought on April 5th, 1242, on the ice of Lake Peipus, which is now Estonia. The heavily armored German Teutonic Knights, along with their Finnish allies, attacked the army of the Novgorodians, led by Alexander Nevsky, routing them. Many of the invaders were killed when the ice broke, and they drowned with their horses. According to the authors of A History of Russia, Nicholas Ryazanovsky and Mark Steinberg, quote, Alexander Nevsky's victories were important, but they represented only a single sequence in the continuous struggle of Novgorod against its western and northwestern foes. Two Soviet specialists have calculated that between 1142 and 1446, Novgorod fought the Swedes 26 times, the German knights 11 times, the Lithuanians 14 times, and the Norwegians 5 times. The two battles that Alexander Nevsky won, the Battle of the Neva and the Battle on the Ice, occurred during and right after the invasion of the Mongols in 1240. Those invaders never reached Novgorod due to the terrain which would have hindered the Mongol horsemen. Now, Nevsky decided it would be insane to resist. Instead, he decided to cooperate with the Mongols and pay tribute. This would ensure Novgorod would remain somewhat independent. A specific conflict that caused problems for the Novgorodians was the Swedish Novgorod Wars fought in the 12th and 13th centuries, which would also spill into the 14th and 15th centuries. While some of the conflicts used the differences in religion, Catholic versus Orthodox, the predominant reason was trade and territory. The two combatants would fight 22 times between 1164 and 1448. At the time, Novgorod would have an impressive number of inhabitants for the time period. The population hovered around 30,000. Its defense systems included solid wooden walls with a number of stone towers. Its location on the Volkhov River made it quite difficult to invade, and the city was divided into two halves, one known as the commercial side, on one side of the river, and the other where many of the poorer people lived. One of the most notable features of medieval Novgorod was its government. While not technically a democracy, the people did have a major say in how the city was run. The system began with the streets of a number of block houses, which were self-governing with an elected elder. Then several streets formed a sotnia, 100. The sotnia would be combined into quarters of konci or konets, of which there were 5. The konets were autonomous to an extent. Each one would own a piatina, which was land outside the city, but would be managed by the city as a whole. Before 1136 and the ouster of Vyacheslav Monomakh, the Grand Prince would control the army and would play a significant role in the administration of laws and justice. After that, the Vetch, a popular assembly among the Slavic peoples during the Middle Ages. Now, the Vetch became a powerful institution in Russian cities such as Novgorod and Pskov. In Novgorod, the Vetch put severe limitations on the prince. Contract would be signed between the Vetch and the prince, with the earliest one on record being signed in 1265 with Alexander Nevsky's brother, Yaroslav. In many of the contracts, there was a deal where the prince could not dismiss an official without court action and the presence of the posednik, or known as the elected mayor. The use of the vetch bell in Novgorod signified the calling of the people to make a decision whether it was an issue of declaring war, mobilization of the army, creating new laws, or raising taxes. While this seems like a kind of seamless way to govern a growing city, it would often end up in violent quarrels between factions within Novgorod. Because of these conflicts, a council of notables would become necessary to conduct day-to-day business. The vetch itself was populated by any free householder. The council was presided over by the archbishop, as well as influential boyars. This was a council that mostly cared about the wealthy citizens, though. And this would lead to the eventual downfall of the independence of Novgorod later in its history. The Novgorodian justice system was another unique facet of life in the city. Here is what Ryazanovsky and Steinberg had to say about it. Quote, "It exhibited a remarkable degree of elaboration, organization, and complexity, as well as high judicial and humanitarian standards. The prince, the posadnik, the tsaizisky, and the archbishop all had their particular courts. A system of jurymen, dokladichki, functioned in the high court presided over by the posednik. The jurymen, 10 in number, consisted of one boyar and one commoner from each of the 5 konsi. Novgorodian jurisprudence also resorted frequently to mediation. The contending persons were asked to nominate 2 mediators, and only when the 4 failed to reach an agreement did court action follow." One thing that's very interesting here is that they did not use torture and considered it rare to execute anyone. As the previously mentioned authors put it, quote, "Much evidence reflects the high regard for human life characteristic of Novgorod. The Novgorod Chronicle at times refers to a great slaughter when it speaks of just killing several persons." While doing my research, I discovered something that genuinely surprised me. In the mid-15th century, the Novgorod Republic was vastly larger than Muscovy. It was almost triple the size, and this fact really bothered the Grand Princes of Moscow. They viewed the vastness as a threat. Still, the Novgorod Republic was having problems internally. There were 2 groups inhabiting the lands. The first was in the Pyatina cities, where the people were somewhat self-governing, and the more sparsely populated far north and east. Some of the cities began to side with the growing power of Moscow, which made security more and more difficult and expensive. Another crisis that was brewing was the growing divide between the haves and the have-nots. The poor were more devoted to the Russian Orthodox Church, while the wealthy were more likely to be interested in preserving their standing and were willing to side with the Lithuanians and Poles, who were Catholic. This divide was to benefit the Muscovite position in the upcoming conflict. The large size of the Novgorod Republic, as I mentioned before, and its wealth, it was a very wealthy republic and city, and it stuck in the craw of the Grand Prince of Moscow, Ivan III. In 1470, rumors swirled that Moscow was eyeing an invasion of the north to consolidate its rule over the Slavic people. The vetch bell was rung. A decision needed to be made whether to accept submission to Moscow or the organization of a campaign of resistance. Now, the people knew that their army would be no match for that of Ivan III's, so the logical ally they would have to team up with would be Lithuania, a mortal enemy of Moscow. The debate between the 2 sides one siding with Moscow and the other with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, was heated. But by a very small margin, the Vetch chose to invite King Kazimierz IV to create an anti-Moscow bloc. This is one of those moments that could have drastically changed the course of history. As author Martin Sixsmith books in his book, Russia, about the decision, quote, "A Novgorod-Lithuanian alliance could possibly have kept Ivan at bay. It could have assumed future dominance in the Russian lands, and it could have meant a wholly different course for Russian history, with Novgorod or Vilnius assuming the role of capital and Catholicism replacing Orthodoxy as the state religion." Of course, we know that this union was not successful, as Ivan got wind of it and sent an army to Novgorod, settling on the outskirts of the city. In July 1471, the Muscovite troops defeated their far weaker opponent at the Battle of the River Shalon. At first, Ivan tried to negotiate a settlement between the two cities of Novgorod and Moscow, but that ultimately failed, causing him to occupy and invade the city. This alliance between Lithuania and Novgorod has actually been debated by some historians, with a number claiming there never was any talk of one, and that Ivan used it as an excuse to take Novgorod. By 1478, the Republic was annexed to Muscovy. Novgorod had maintained its western leanings until the annexation, but that would drastically change. Because the Mongols never conquered them, they were structured differently than the more Asiatic areas like Muscovy. The influence of the Mongols and their strong leadership would lead to the autocratic control of what would become Russia. While Novgorod would lose its independence, it would not disappear from sight. When the city was annexed, it was the third largest city in the country with between 25 and 30,000 inhabitants. This would not last very long. In the 1560s, there was a devastating famine. The famine was due in part to a series of poor harvests, an increase in taxation to pay for the Livonian War, and the fight against the Mongols. This would reduce the population by quite a bit, but the worst was yet to come. Ivan III's grandson, Ivan Grozny, Ivan the Terrible, decided to devastate Novgorod and all the lands which were part of the Republic. It would depopulate Novgorod, but even worse, and Ivan didn't think this one completely through, it actually would weaken the entire Russian state. Overpopulation was straining the food system, and then the plague hit, which is historically consistent with other famines. And this is in my field in health. When food is in short supply, human immune systems suffer. Now, adding insult to injury, when Ivan IV attacked Novgorod in 1570, and this is where they caused a lot more of the famine, they also burned the agricultural fields surrounding the city, causing irreparable damage that lasted decades. On top of all of that, Ivan's Oprochniki forces massacred anywhere from 2,000 to 15,000 residents of the city. Not only did this cause shortages of food for Novgorod, but it also spread to the rest of Muscovy. Some historians claim that this action lay the groundwork for the time of troubles that would begin in 1598 and lasting until 1613. With the country so weakened due to Ivan's policies of revenge on Novgorod, the Crimean Tatars saw a window and they attacked and sacked Moscow in 1571. After Ivan's death and that of his son Fyodor, the last of the Rurikids, Novgorod had a resurgence under Tsar Boris Godunov. He reinstated their trade privileges and restored its distinct identity and institutions, including the customs policy and the administrative division. During the time of troubles, though, Novgorod was captured by Jacob de la Garde of Sweden in the summer of 1611. The territory was restored to Moscow through the signing of the Treaty of Stolbova to end the Ingrian War in 1617, which had been fought between the Swedish Empire and Russian Tsardom. Over the following centuries, Novgorod became an important northern city within the Russian imperial era, being named the capital of the Novgorodian Governorate. When the Bolsheviks took over, they would move the region into the Leningrad Oblast in 1927. One of the most noteworthy events attached to Novgorod between the start of the imperial era and the Bolshevik Revolution was the Decembrist Revolt in 1825. If we remember, this is when there was a thought that Constantine was supposed to become Tsar, but he didn't want that position, and it went to his brother Nicholas I. Well, they thought that something had gone wrong, and they decided to revolt. Well, they felt that the old Novgorodian system of allowing people to rule themselves was far superior of the authoritarian rule. Dmitry Venevitnov wrote a pro-Decembrist poem in 1826, appropriately entitled Novgorod. Quote, "Answer, great city, where are your glorious days of liberty, when your voice, the scourge of kings, rang true like the bells at your noisy assembly? Say, where are those times? They are so far away, oh, so far away." When the German army attacked Novgorod on August 15th, 1941, they would absolutely devastate the city. Of the 2,536 stone buildings, less than 40 would remain after the Red Army liberated the city on January 19th, 1944. After the war, Novgorod was rebuilt, although one structure remained pretty much unscathed, and this is incredible. The Cathedral of St. Sophia, the Holy Wisdom of God, which was built between 1045 and 1050. Before we go, let's talk about Novgorod today. In 1992, the city was named a UNESCO World Heritage Site. As of the 2021 census, it had 224,286 inhabitants, which makes it the 88th most populous city in Russia. Its climate is considered a warm summer, humid, continental climate with extremely cold winters, with one of the coldest days would be around minus 45 degrees Celsius. The term Veliky, though, was only added to the name of the city in 1999 to differentiate it from Nizhny Novgorod. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Join me next time when we cover the influencers of the Russian Tsars. They will include many of the right-hand men and women who gave so much information to and advice to the Tsars that they had great power that sometimes caused them to fall really hard. So, until next time, до свидания и спасибо за внимание.